Welcome to the Total Soccer Show and the glorious return of The Big Thing, the show where we sink our teeth into a major current affair topic in the beautiful world of soccer. Today, there's arguably no bigger topic than a fundamental change to the structure of the American game. USL's proposal to bring European-style promotion and relegation to its professional league system. In this episode, we're going to look at what's happened so far in this development, the timing, the ways in which it could change soccer in the States, and the questions that remain unanswered. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today, it's the man who'll always be promoted to USL Division 1 in our hearts. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello, Taylor.
Hello. Promoted to the lowest division from which you cannot be relegated? That's high praise, Ryan. That's high praise to start the show.
The only way's up, baby. That's the way we
I appreciate that.
Also here, promotion candidate Graham Ruthven. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. There's no limit to how low I can be relegated. There's no bottom tier.
Also with us on this conversation, a man who's introduced third, but will never be relegated in our hearts. Of course, it's Joe Lowry. Hello, Joe.
Oh, hey, Ryan. I'm imagining Graham and I in some sort of promotion playoff. I think that maybe is how this is going, and the winner of the promotion podcast playoff gets up to the next tier. I don't know exactly how we're going to structure it. It's going to take some thinking, some voting from our ownership. But if we can get that super majority, I think we can make it happen.
I love the phrase.
Too much stress, too much anxiety in that situation. It's yours, Joe. Have the trophy.
Oh, no. Self-relegation already. We're a few minutes in, Graham. Goodness. By the way, just to say, Joe, the phrase supermajority, love it.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Nobody really knows how many. No, it's 2/3. But, nobody really knows how many it is. It's just a great word that we get to use on occasion.
It's great. So majority, obviously, like over 50%. Super majority, over 2/3. I love that.
I mean, 2/3 is over 50%. I feel like the word majority would just suffice in that situation. But
or we could call it,
sound good.
We call it majority. The majority. No. Never mind.
If you need to emphasize how much everybody was on board with this, then a majority might not get it done. But a supermajority, that tells you that everybody is emphatically on board except for the
ones who
were not.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that would have been an ultra majority.
My mistake. Yeah.
Ultra majority is everybody. What about hyper majority? Is that 90%?
Well, I thought we were going from ultra majority to hooligan majority, and they had to ban those. Like, we couldn't do that anymore.
I feel like we're just naming iPhones here. What's the majority Pro Max?
Goodness me. Let's move on from this conversation. Before we get into the USL pro-rel chat, just to let you know, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show is the best way to support this endeavor. You get bonus episodes, bonus video content, and access to our Discord server. All the cool kids are in there. Come and have a chat with us in there. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. And we're on the YouTubes if you want to see our beautiful visages. Graham's going to do his striker pose right now. There he is. Come find us on the YouTubes. Thank you very much. All right.
Never has it been less true that all the cool kids are hanging out when we led into this with multiple jokes about majorities and super majorities. I feel like it gave away that maybe we're all dorks, and so is everyone in the Discord.
We're doing a podcast about USL. It's a given that we're all dorks.
I also think it's strong to categorize them as jokes as well, to be fair.
Yes.
Super jokes, more like, Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Joe.
Hey, it keeps on coming from Joe Rel over there. Well done, Joe. Actually, Joe, let's come to you to start off with. For people who haven't come across this story of the USL in bringing in promotion and relegation, what exactly is going on here? Could you give us the top line, please?
Yeah, so on Tuesday of this week, USL Championship and USL League One owners, those are the men's professional owners, or the owners of these men's professional teams that the USL already has, the Championship being a second division league as sanctioned by US Soccer, League One being a third division league. No, the names don't make any sense. Thanks a lot, England. Those owners voted on Tuesday to approve the implementation of promotion and relegation, making the USL the first pro sports league in the United States to adopt pro-rel. Now, they're not adopting it tomorrow. They're adopting it in 2028. That's the plan. Now, this is all coming on the back of the USL announcing an intention to start a Division 1 men's league in either 2027 or 2028. It seems like it's going to be 2028 at the earliest, and maybe we'll get onto some of that stuff later. So the goal in all of this for USL is to start a closed promotion and relegation system across those three tiers starting in 2028. That is the goal. Owners voted on Tuesday. USL President Paul McDonough told Alex Abnos at The Guardian that 90% of the current owners of men's pro USL teams voted in favor. This is something that the USL has flirted with for a long time. I don't even know what that is. Like, crazy. We didn't even get to that level of majority. This is something that USL has flirted with for a long time internally. They've flirted with it publicly quite aggressively since at least 2018. Now it is actually happening. This is something we talked about at the beginning of yesterday's show. I still can't quite believe it, and my head is still going in a lot of different directions on this topic because there are so many unanswered questions of what happens next. But for the very first time ever, there is a clear line of sight to teams moving between leagues, like semi-permanently from one season to the next, in American sports and in American soccer, which I think is awesome. I love it.
Yep. I'm in agreement entirely, Joe, with all of that positivity. I would just add from some of the points I saw yesterday, like it's worth clarifying why we're excited about pro-rel for a second division / third division league. I would say for the sickos who are already listening, thank you. And for the people who are interested, thank you for being curious about this one. But I think Joe laid it out really well with the fact that they are trying to also get the D1 league off and running. I do think there is some thought that they will try to launch that for the 2027-2028 season so that they have a first division league in place, and then you bring in pro-rel from there. To Joe's point, who knows about the timeline of that and how quickly they can get everything up and running. But to me, that is not as significant as pro-rel, but it is a huge part of that. Because if you had promotion relegation that like topped out at the second division, it's great and it's exciting, and there's still abilities to move between leagues and it creates new competitive environments. But I think it also ultimately feels like that's great. You're still one level below the top flight league that doesn't have pro-rel. And so I think the fact that they are getting that sanctioning, that they are moving towards having that Division 1 status, does then theoretically create a more equal playing field between the two leagues.
Graham, I think the way this has evolved this week, what surprises me is that sort of 90% majority, ultra, hyper, super majority that we've been told about. Because if you're a business owner who owns one of these teams, let's say you're a middling to lower USL Championship team, I'm surprised that you are all in to jeopardize your status in that league, unless we sort of buy into the fact that holistically USL as a 3-tier system will be treated with relatively equal cadence between them.
Yeah, so you're surprised that basically a lot of these owners have taken, like, there's the risk of relegation here.
Yeah.
That's always been the barrier to pro-rel in American soccer, is somehow convincing these owners to accept that risk. And that's one of the most encouraging things about this vote. One of the things we should maybe clarify, Joe, you referenced Alex's Q&A with Paul McDonough for The Guardian. I also read that. It's really interesting. Yeah. I think it's laid out in a really good way as well, really clear way. It's just a Q&A session, so I would recommend listeners go and read that at The Guardian. But one of the things I think is important to note is they've only really voted on the intention to implement promotion and relegation. So we're going to do a lot of chatting today. We're going to ask a lot of questions. Ryan's going to ask us a lot of questions, and we're doing that because it's fun to do so and to speculate, and also it's important to think about and envisage how it might pan out. I don't even think the USL has a lot of the answers to these questions at the moment. They are going to now study different models and different ideas. We know that there will be 3 tiers, that we know that there will be mobility between them, which in itself is huge, but we don't really have any details on the specific format or how they're going to satisfy the Pro League standards that US Soccer lays out. So yeah, this is just the first step, and I feel like there's going to be countless other meetings between these owners, and within those meetings there may be, while they've agreed to, or 90% of them have agreed to go down this road here, maybe we're going to get fundamental disagreements between these owners between now and this actually being implemented.
Yeah, Graham, there's so many decisions to be made here, and that piece again from Alex is really, really good. There's a quote in there from Paul McDonough that I just copied word for word into my notes because I felt like it was so helpful. The quote was, "We've adopted promotion relegation, but we know full well that there's different things we have to talk about. How do we enact it across 3 tiers? We've got to get the Division 1 thing going. What are the mechanics of promotion relegation up and down? How do we protect teams that get promoted if the expenses are different?" I talked to yesterday, kind of on the back of all this news, like a lot of people inside USL and kind of across American soccer. And those themes kept popping up. Like, there aren't answers for those things yet. USL knows it needs to get to work, and there is a ton of work that still needs to happen here. I think you made that point well, Graham. This is something that is, like, they're moving towards this sort of common goal now, but how they get there and exactly what that goal looks like when they get there is still an open question.
Sounds like a tomorrow problem, a lot of those things.
It sounds to me like the scene in The Simpsons in which Mr. Burns is talking to his doctor, and his doctor is saying that basically he has so many things wrong with him that they can't all get through the door at the same time. And his takeaway from that is that he is indestructible. It's just sort of like, all right, we'll we're theoretically okay with pro-rel, but like we want our existing investment protected. We want provisions about who goes down and how they go down and all of these things. And then the resolution just comes out that pro-rel is coming. And it is exciting. It is going to happen, we think, we hope. But there are many, many things to be figured out. And I do think the financial side of it is a massive one. I do think because you had sort of ownership requirements in terms of how much money they're able to put down, how much money they have backing them. You can't have more than a select few owners qualify for that value. And so I think with the amount of money that some owners have already invested or some ownership groups have already invested, there will be protections in place or some ways to kind of make sure that they are fairly compensated when pro-rel comes into effect and if and when those clubs are relegated. So I think that would just be one of the many stumbling blocks, but it is still exciting and encouraging that they have all kind of announced their decision to move forward, or at least the ultra super majority has.
And it's exciting because it feels like these owners are tapped into what their fans actually want. I think it was in one of Paul's pieces for The Athletic, there was a story from Charleston Battery owner Rob Salvatore. And basically, this came after that. I think it's a fan event of some kind with hundreds of Charleston fans. And it was after the D1 announcement, and basically someone asked from the crowd, does this clear the way for promotion and relegation? And the response, Rob says in this piece, was incredible and was more vociferous than any other point in this fan event. And so he sensed from that point on there was a real desire from fans to accelerate this. And I think since that D1 league announcement, which was like last month, it wasn't that long ago, it feels like this is really accelerated. So there it is. That's encouraging. Like there's a desire to get this done. I've seen some people suggest on social media that maybe this never happens. I think this will happen. It's just the question of how it is implemented.
Taylor, is it all upside? Because it seems like all the fans want it, a majority of the clubs want it, and there's those examples of maybe clubs who maybe are taking a risk of relegation, as we've discussed here. But it seems like it's almost universally upside, this decision, right?
The decision, yes, I think because it creates a new level of interest. It creates a new level of enthusiasm. As I said when we talked about this briefly yesterday, I think it has brought about interest from people who might not otherwise be interested in American soccer, and the idea that pro-rel is here and that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps and sort of find new ways to be competitive, and it can tap into new markets that maybe wouldn't otherwise be able to get the huge backing or the expansion fees from Major League Soccer. There is a ton of positive. I think the threat of relegation should be maybe remembered, and I hope USL in their planning does a lot at sort of looking at leagues that maybe handle relegation the best and provide the most coverage for teams that are relegated. The other aspect of this that is, I think, somewhat negative. Do you want me to hold off on my other really negative thing, or so Graham can talk about relegation, or do you want me to just launch right into my sadness point?
No, I was just going to build on top of your point there, Taylor, about relegation safeguards, because I think that's my main worry is for every club that gets it right and rises up the division, you typically have one that spends itself into a black hole trying to get there. So however USL implements this, there has to be safeguards. They have to learn from the mistakes that European leagues and leagues around the world have made with promotion and relegation.
And it's the increased spending that would make me slightly nervous, because we've seen leagues in the past rise and fall. We've seen leagues exist and not exist. We've seen sort of interesting ideas in American soccer that haven't fully worked out. And so there's a part of me that does wonder how much of this is a sort of like attempt to keep pace with Major League Soccer from USL. But the larger thing that, like, I'm sorry to have to mention it, is that, like, there are consistent warnings that we are facing a looming recession as a country and as a global economy. We have had a pretty strong economy for a good long while. I do wonder what happens when people lose money and have to trim down their expenses. Does that USL franchise maybe fall by the wayside in terms of what millionaires are spending their money on? How much interest are they going to put into it? A high financial barrier to entry ensures that you kind of aren't going to lose that interest, that you aren't going to let your investment fall off. Pro-rel does not. And so that is the one thing I keep going back to as a potential negative, is just that we are in good economic times. When we are not, is there as much money to throw around? Is there as much money to cover teams that can't cover their own travel expenses if they're going from one side of the country to another on a consistent basis in a top flight league?
What I'm hearing here, Taylor, is that you want tax breaks for millionaires who own USL teams. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
it entirely.
Very good. Glad to hear it. That is your side on this issue. Plenty more to talk about on this one. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more. Join us then. Total Soccer Show. Welcome back to the big thing. We're talking all things USL pro-rel. Joe, the actual relegation mechanism. There's surely going to be a relegation playoff, isn't there, to make things more exciting? Like, that has to happen, right? Well, I was also thinking, if we're going to Americanize it, like, the only other example I can think of sort of consequences of finishing bottom of your league is in fantasy, when you have to do, like, sit in a Waffle House for 24 hours, that kind of thing. Do you think there's going to be that for the bottom team in each league as well?
I think that just needs to be for the bottom team of the third tier, right, where there's nowhere else to go. That's when you have to do the Waffle House waffle punishment, which, if people don't know, you get stuck in a Waffle House for 24 hours, and for every waffle you eat, you get an hour taken off of that 24 hours. So if we make Taylor go to the Waffle House, if he eats a waffle, then he's only in there for 23 hours. All right, Graham, you can do it.
See,
if you eat a
this is
waffle,
what
you're there for
everybody
23
says.
hours.
I voted against this for my fantasy league, knowing that everybody thinks,
No.
I could crush 12 waffles, no problem. No, you cannot. They are concrete. You can eat 2.5 max. I don't care how full you are. Then you can cram in like 1.5 later on, and eventually you're going to be sick.
But I still get to go to a Waffle House, right?
And sit on their plastic benches
All
that are
day
designed
long.
to get you in and out. Yeah, have fun with that.
Agreed. Graham, you can certainly eat more than 2.5. I don't know.
And wait till you get to
I can
3
handle
a.m.
that.
in certain neighborhoods in that Waffle House, Graham. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, that's true.
There will be, and Paul McDonough has talked about this, USL will attempt to find a structure for pro-rel, because, again, they haven't finalized that yet. They're going to attempt to find a structure for pro-rel that maintains as much playoff as possible, right? That is American sports, is playoffs. When people think of American sports, I think playoffs is one of the first things that comes to mind. Those games matter. And part of the hope with pro-rel is to make more games matter, but they also don't want to ditch sort of the thing that's been working for them anyway, right? When you can draw hundreds of thousands of viewers on a CBS network for your final, you want to keep some of that momentum. You don't want to toss all of that aside. I think it's interesting, Ryan, that you mentioned sort of the structure of all this. And I think the structure is really important, because one of the big questions in all of this is, how do you actually make this 3-tiered system, right? Owners have talked about how the shift to adding a D1 league to USL makes this whole thing more enticing. The other thing I think that has prompted this decision to happen now, as opposed to 2 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever, is the allure of the 26 World Cup. I really do think that owners in USL and USL itself want to try to capitalize on the increased interest on this sport in this country following the World Cup, where there'll be more eyes on this sport in this country than there have ever been, right? Whether actually launching in 2028 or whenever this is going to happen accomplishes that goal, I'm not so sure about that. But I think there is an intention here from USL and from its owners to capitalize on some of that momentum. Along the way, to actually get there, to make this happen, you need to make the D1 league, right? That is, the World Cup and the D1 league very much seem to be the two things that have been the largest catalysts for this all to happen. To get the D1 league, I kind of think you also need to know what the structure is going to be. Because if Taylor has a lot of money, and I want Taylor to come invest in a USL Division 1 team, it might be helpful for Taylor to know what his chances are of staying up in D1, as an example. Like, how to protect that investment. Now, I do think one of the pros for USL in all of this, that's not a good phrase in this episode, one of the benefits that USL has in pulling all this off is that realistically the gaps between their divisions are not all that large right now. D1 will increase that gap, but there is not a huge difference between the average USL League 1 team and the average USL Championship team. If MLS were to do this and create a new league, there would be a huge drop-off for them, right? So that's an advantage for USL. But still, when they need to attract new D1 owners, and they're going to need to attract new D1 owners to actually make this 3-tiered system possible, they need to have some semblance of an idea of what the goal is for how many teams are going to be in the system as a whole, how many are going to move across divisions from one season to the next. All of that stuff needs to be developed. And USL knows that, of course. But there's going to need to be a lot of expansion to pull this thing off. And maybe we'll talk more about that later. And there's also going to need to be a real structure in place. And hopefully that structure includes Waffle House.
We all hope that. Joe, is there a big issue with the actual D1 status itself as well? Because there's certain criteria that teams have to meet to get to D1 status, which, in my understanding, not a lot of current USL Championship teams do. So, in order, I presume, and this is only a presumption, that the teams in the USL Championship predominantly get bumped up to that D1 division, right? When the time comes, does that mean that D1 status criteria gets relaxed, or there's a stay period until it's met?
Yeah, I think you're asking the right questions, and I don't think there are answers for those questions. I don't think USL has those things ironed out, frankly, at the moment. There will be, my expectation would be that a certain number of USL championship teams, of which there are 24 teams right now, the only second division men's league in the United States, a certain number of those teams will move up to the USL Division 1 when that actually comes into play. Now, almost all of them would need to do work on their stadiums, and only some of them fit the market size requirement that is set out by US Soccer in the pro league standards that US Soccer has, and those standards are built to try and help some stability stay throughout American soccer and not just have teams in markets that can't support a 20,000 seat stadium building a 20,000 seat stadium and going bust, right? That's why the pro league standards exist. USL at the moment in its D1 pursuit, they don't have enough existing markets to go and make that happen. So they're going to try and get some USL championship markets that do fit that bill in terms of market size to build larger stadiums, soccer-specific ones probably, or to increase the ones they already have to go and make that happen. But then they need to go out there and recruit as well. And really, you think about, there were 42 owners that voted on this across USL Championship and across USL League One. 42 owners is not enough for a three-tiered league system. It's not. So if there's something that's going to hold this idea of pro-rel, I don't think it's pro-rel. I don't think I don't think that's the big hurdle, frankly, in all this. It's been voted. Yeah, you got to figure out the details, and that stuff is important in terms of the structure. The real hurdle is getting enough teams in your league to actually, in your three leagues, to make this happen. If pro-rel doesn't happen by 28, and I'm not sure it's going to, it's not going to be because they couldn't figure out a structure for it. It's going to be because they couldn't get enough teams in the door quickly enough with the right infrastructure to make this actually happen.
I think Joe is correct in everything he has said. The interesting wrinkle for me is when you look at the Division I requirements from U.S. Soccer, they are very clearly written for a league that is going to be a closed single-entity league, and so they are trying to make sure that that league will be like permanent, that it won't just kind of fly by night. And so that's, in my mind at least, that's why you have requirements as to the size of the city or the population you're going into. You have to have guarantees about the owner's net worth and how much money they're able to kind of provide. You have to cover all the different time zones. There's just a lot of things that, to me, speak to, we want protections in place so we don't have a league that we promote that immediately falls apart. None of those really allow for, or I think incorporate, pro-rel into them. And that is a thing that I think is going to be an immediate conflict. There will have to be waivers if U.S. Soccer wants to allow this to happen, because there are certain franchises that just won't be able to get that stadium capacity requirement hit by the time they would need to. There's like Louisville City, I think, just expanded their capacity and just renovated their stadium, but to a point where it is not nearly at the level where it would need to be. I forget what their like actual attendance limit is. Looking at it really quickly, it's 15,300, I think, is the maximum amount, but you would want to expand from there. And so I do think there will be initially a lot of waivers that U.S. Soccer will have to kind of be okay with, or sort of little things that they'll have to let slide. But I do wonder if there will also be an attempt from USL, at least, to push for U.S. Soccer to change some of that Division I sanctioning to allow for a system that has pro-rel, where you can have smaller clubs come up with the provision that if they don't succeed, they'll go back down and be replaced by somebody who can stay up.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if the two bodies, US Soccer and the USL, didn't meet in the middle on this. I think there will be some revisions, as you say, Taylor, to the Pro League standards. I think there may be some kind of agreement where USL kind of officially formulates a working strategy towards something 10 years from now, where every club has a certain number of seats in their stadium, or even Phoenix Rising, Joe, if they had to, I'd imagine a city the size of Phoenix, there's got to be somewhere else they'd be able to play for a couple seasons while they do work on the Casa Grande, of course. But yeah, I just,
the crown jewel of the West. I love it.
I'm not saying that this isn't a challenge, but I would be shocked if this was like a deal breaker for this plan.
But why do you need minimum stadium requirements in a league with pro-rel? Truthfully, because I understand why you would want that. You don't want in your top flight league, if it's closed, to have a cap on the amount of match day revenue you can make. If you can only bring in 5,000 people, and you're competing in a league where everybody else is bringing in 20 and 25,000. You're going to be at an immediate disadvantage. You're not going to be as competitive. But in a league where pro-rel exists, isn't that sort of well, that's on you. If you don't want to play in a bigger stadium, if you don't want to make more money, you're probably going to be in some trouble and you're going to go right back down. Like, am I seeing it wrong? Because I know other leagues do have stadium requirements, like European leagues certainly do, the Champions League certainly does, but I still wonder if that is a little bit of an outdated model for U.S. soccer.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and one of the things that I come out of this whole discussion with is a desire to learn more about how pro-rel works everywhere else, and I'm curious to research this more. The thing that came to mind to me, Taylor, when you were talking, was just from an atmospheric standpoint and from a broadcast standpoint, frankly, of broadcasting those games in front of a much smaller audience on a much worse field, you would presume, compared to a much nicer. I don't think broadcasters love that. I don't think leagues love that. I would also imagine there's probably something else in there that I'm not getting. But it's an interesting question. It really is.
Joe, I think that's a really good point, because when you have like one team, who was it? Luton, who had like you have to walk through an apartment to get to their stadium. When you have every other like team in the league having 50, 60, 70, 80,000 seat stadiums, that little wrinkle is sort of like, oh, what a cute, fun little outlier. When half of the teams in the league are playing on a high school pitch, maybe it's less of an outlier and more of a problem. So that's a pretty valid point, Joe.
And Luton's a good example, Taylor, because I was just quickly doing some Googling, because I know the Champions League has a capacity requirement. I think that might actually be a bit of an exception. I don't think the Premier League has a capacity requirement. What they do have requirements around are like broadcast facilities and press facilities, and so I think those things are important, because it's about maintaining a high standard of product, right? But I think the capacity thing, besides the Champions League, maybe some of the European competitions, other leagues, I know in Scotland we got rid of that. We had a 10,000 seat capacity requirement, which was ridiculous for like 10 years, and then we just got rid of that. So, that's kind of a pretty standard thing across world football.
Taylor, I'm notoriously slow. Can you explain to me why it's a problem if half the teams are on high school fields and half are in nice stadiums? Who's it a problem for?
The league, for optics. I think because if you're trying to make it seem like you are a competitive top flight league, I think
players too, right? In all this as well, yeah.
Yeah, certainly. But I think there is, in a league in a country that is very obsessed with the idea of like creating a sense of elite branding, sort of like you want it to look like not only are we a top flight league with promotion relegation, but we're one that has beautiful new facilities and beautiful pitches and really strong infrastructure. And so if you're a player contemplating coming to play in the United States and you're choosing between MLS and USL, you want there to be an obvious draw to USL. If they're playing on high school pitches and changing in high school locker rooms, it's not going to appeal to the players, but it will kind of automatically make you look less professional, a bit more rinky-dink than a league that has built-in stadiums and built-in attendances.
Okay. I also think there's nothing wrong with a federation demanding high standards from your Division 1. Like that in my mind anyway, that's the way it should be.
Otherwise you get Scotland.
Otherwise you get Scotland, yeah.
Got there before me.
when Joe said 42 teams is not enough for 3 tiers, I said I thought to myself, no, but it's enough for 4 in Scotland.
Scotland is the size of Casa Grande, though. To be fair,
that's true. Much larger country in the US. But I don't have any issue with US soccer demanding a high standard from D1 leagues. It's just whether those standards prevent mobility of teams. That's what you want to avoid.
Yes, I would agree with all that. That is a big hurdle, right? That's a big question. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about all this is it's not just the pro-rel bit that I think is fun. It is the increased investment that you would imagine is going to follow, right? To help avoid some of the problems that we're talking about right now. I can't imagine U.S. soccer is going to just trash all of the pro league standards and rewrite them to make the USL be able to do this if they wanted to start it tomorrow, right? Maybe there is some sort of meeting in the middle that Graham mentioned. That wouldn't shock me. But really, there's going to have to be increased investment. We talked about the need for more D1 teams and markets that can hold D1 teams. That's important. So there's going to be a big phase of expansion coming to USL, both at the top and also towards the bottom. With League One, it doesn't have as many teams as the championship right now. There's room to expand at both ends of this. Probably still some markets that are in the USL that maybe won't be by the time all this stuff starts. So there's some reshuffling of the deck to do there. Then you think about the team in the stadium sizes, which we've kind of already talked about. There's some work to do there. And then there's also the other component that I think fits with this discussion of, well, why does the product need to look a certain way on TV or in person for this to make sense, for a team to be in D1 or for it to fit within this structure? And I think that there's this idea that pro-rel makes stories, right? Pro-rel makes drama, pro-rel builds narratives, pro-rel increases stakes. Those are all good things. Those are reasons why we watch sports. Those are reasons why we talk about sports. Pro-rel will help get more eyes on the USL, right? We're talking about the USL today. Frankly, we wouldn't have been doing that if this story hadn't come out. So That's an example, right? That's going to help. But the product, I think, will help keep them there. Stories will too, right? But they have to work in tandem sort of with each other. If you have great stories and a bad product, your stories aren't really so great. If you have great stories and a pretty good product, maybe you actually keep some of those people that came into your door in the first place because they heard about you and they didn't hear about you before, because they read about you and they read about the team that got relegated last year and flirted with bankruptcy. Maybe that's not the best example that USL would want, right? But they read about the team that got promoted for the first time ever in American soccer history, and they stuck around and watched that team play and maybe became a fan in a non-USL market because that's never happened before. And maybe they're an NBA fan and that's never happened before. It happened before. I think that spending to increase the quality of the product, and by that I mean the facilities that are going to draw better players, spending on better players to make better soccer, spending on all of the things that are going to make your league look better to a national audience, is going to be huge. If USL does those things, maybe this has a chance to be more than a ripple in a pond. If they actually go out there and check all those boxes, maybe this is something that does increase their share of the soccer pie in the US from something that is almost invisible, which is what it is now, to something that actually is visible and has even a little bit of national pull in the way that the league just doesn't have today.
If we're talking about creating more than a ripple and we're talking about optics as well, Graham, this makes me think about the timing, the 2028 timing. So when the European Super League idea came out, I don't think the idea was, we're going to do this in 3 years' time, this big seismic change to the game. 3 years' time. We've got a World Cup on these shores next year. Are we missing an opportunity here by delaying by this much, by not having this, come right on the back of the time when the entire world is going to be looking at soccer in this country?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I think in an ideal world, you'd be starting it either in 2026 or immediately after the World Cup in 2027. But I've got mixed thoughts on this, because 2026 shouldn't be thought of as this cut-off point where nothing more can be done to develop American soccer after 2026. The evolution has to continue. So I actually think, I mean, yeah, from a commercial point of view, you'd want it to coincide with the World Cup. But I also think there's a plus side to having something to invigorate American soccer after the World Cup, so you don't just have this huge drop-off where nothing happens from an innovation standpoint after that tournament. So I'm okay with it, but I can understand why some people would think the timing is a little bit off. But keep in mind, MLS started in, 96, right?
Yep.
A couple years after 94. And as a league, they were able to grow from that point. So there is precedent for it happening before.
There is. I think the difference, though, is that in that situation, there was no other game in town. So, sort of launching a league after the World Cup is you kind of have the license to take as much time as you need within that window of still having some level of interest. It's an interesting one if MLS does move to a European calendar, which I kind of expect they will by that World Cup. Then it does give MLS at least a year, if not 2 seasons, 2 full years, to basically kind of cement their status even more and kind of keep more eyes on their own league. So to Ryan's point, that is where maybe USL should be targeting, a launch in the first European calendar top division season for them in 2026 to 2027. But I think that is maybe a step too far with how much stuff they have to get figured out. And though I think that would be the ideal for them, I think that then runs the risk of starting off in very kind of unsound footing and things looking a little bit thrown together, and then you immediately lose that interest because it seems like a thrown together league versus a league that has staying power and sustainability.
I think it's an interesting point, Taylor, with MLS maybe making a change off the back of the World Cup. That is very possible, by the way, and maybe we'll get some more news on that in the next handful of weeks here. I don't know what's going to happen there, but I kind of think USL is missing the boat on all this stuff. And you know who else thinks they might be missing the boat? Paul McDonough. And I haven't talked with Paul McDonough about this, but he's gone on the record publicly talking about how when he comes in to be the president of the USL, he thought the pro-rel talks were much further along than they actually were. He's talked about that publicly. And the reality is it's hard to corral owners. It's hard to get that super majority. Ding, ding, ding. There's the buzzword. It's hard to get people all rowing in the same direction. MLS has experienced that in a very real way for a very long time. USL has experienced that as well. We're talking about, Graham, to go back to your point, which I don't totally disagree with, right? The hope is that the World Cup creates a larger audience that'll be there when you're ready to tap into them. I don't think that that's the way to maximize yourself off the World Cup, but I don't think it's the end of the world either. You'd rather do it right than rush it. I think we're still being a bit charitable, thinking that this is going to happen by 28. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm a skeptic here. We could be looking at 29 or 30, and by then you're an entire World Cup cycle away from where you were before. Like it's a long time. There's a lot of work to do and all this, and USL knows that. But I think they would have been much better off if all these conversations were 2 years ahead of where they actually are.
Counterpoint. With the 2030 World Cup already being in 6 different countries and 3 continents, maybe U.S. Soccer is just like, look, FIFA, let us host one U.S. game so that we can promote the USL First Division in 2030. We'll give you, I don't know, like 20 million? Does that get it done? I don't know. There's probably a way to get one game hosted in the United States for that World Cup. You don't think?
Yeah,
no.
We'll let you keep the Club World Cup trophy in the Oval Office for a few years. That's already started.
There you go. With the key, Graham.
With the key, yeah.
Don't forget that.
What does the key do? Nobody knows. Yeah, I think that's all very fair, Joe. What I would say is, and look, maybe I've got this wrong because obviously I don't know USL as well as certainly you do, Joe, as a fan of a team in that league. But if this was MLS, I would say absolutely no chance. Does this? If they'd stated in 3 years' time we'll have pro-rel, not a chance. That'll be 10 years plus. USL seems to be much more of a move fast and break things kind of mentality, a little bit more of a disruptor. So even they might not be in a perfect position in 3 years' time, but I still think there's a chance that maybe they think, let's just go with this and we'll build the plane while it's flying. Whereas if it was MLS, as I say, that's not how that would work.
Move fast and break things, the Darwin Núñez story. There we go. I like it very much indeed. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about how this will have an impact on MLS and the future of USL. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to the big thing. Joe, it's time to play some make-believe.
Ooh.
Let's make believe that you are Don Garber, Commissioner of Major League Soccer. This news breaks about USL's pro-rel stance. How you feeling? Are you quaking in your boots, or are you feeling relaxed?
Let me do my Don Garber. I don't have a Don Garber impression, but this is what I would do if I were him. Huh. That's interesting.
Pretty relaxed, yeah. Quite relaxed.
All right. I got to go find a new expansion team or something. I don't know. I really don't think that this has... I think this has raised eyebrows around Major League Soccer. I don't think that this is going to spur any sort of immediate response from Major League Soccer, which ties into the question of how much impact this whole thing's going to have at all. And I'm really, really curious what you guys think, because I don't really know fully where I stand on all of this. I think I talked about earlier how the USL's piece of the pie is going to be larger. I am really skeptical that it's going to be so much larger. Like, is this... I love this. I love all this. As a USL fan, I'm really into this concept. Is this going to make a Colorado Springs Switchbacks Hartford Athletic game on October 29th, 2028, if that's when this happens? Like, anything special? I don't know. For those fans, it is. Of course it is. But this is about trying to break into the national conversation for USL in a lot of ways. And I'm just not sure that does that. And that's when, if you're MLS, that's when you start to really care about this. If USL is actually making a grab for a real piece of the pie, well, hold on a minute. We need to be making a grab for a piece of the pie. Like, we're struggling to get that pie in the first. I don't know why I'm so deep in this illustration. We're struggling to get that share.
I'm liking it. Lots of pie.
Good. Yeah. I was thinking more like apple rather than meat pie, but whatever does it for you, Graham. Like, MLS needs to be grabbing a larger share of the American soccer market, right? That's what everybody wants to do. And I'm just not convinced that even with a lot of increased investment and expansion into new markets, that this is necessarily going to make a real play for that, if for USL, who are so trapped in that localized league format that breaking into the national level is just really hard. MLS has barely done that, right? And MLS spends a lot more money on all of these components than USL does. So pro-rel, the hope is that it gets you there in a way that doesn't require you to spend bucket loads of cash. But I'm just real skeptical that this is going to, in the long term, have a real impact on Major League Soccer.
Yeah, I think there will be... I mean, the owners will be talking amongst themselves, right, about it. There'll be some messages between some owners about this. But at this point, it'll just be like a bit of curiosity. But I do think if you
And then they get back to their money fight, right?
yeah, exactly, yeah. It's
we were throwing
the
hundreds today, not 20s.
scene in Zoolander, the petrol station, but with money. But if USL makes a success of this and they start to get some new investment, and even if the gap starts to close just a little bit, where MLS feels just a tiny bit threatened by this new structure, then that could be when some owners start to raise it in meetings. But yeah, I think this is going to have, in my opinion, and this is just a gut thing, but I think this is going to have more of an impact on the lower levels of this ecosystem than the D1 league, essentially. I think MLS just has such an advantage at that level that I don't know if a USL Division 1 will ever close the gap on MLS. But it's exciting to think about how this will invigorate those lower leagues. And that is the thing that could set a precedent, where MLS isn't necessarily thinking, oh, well, we can grow what we have in the top division. They're maybe thinking, well, we can have a bigger piece of the lower league pie that now USL has created for itself. That's where I do think there might be a precedent set over the next number of years.
I'm not sure I would be as laissez-faire as Joe Lowry's Don Garber was a moment ago, because
Nodding.
you see a league, let's say, I suppose it depends how much of a cultural moment the relegation thing creates over the next over its first 4 or 5 years, let's say. Because then at that point, you've got something that people are buying into. You've got 3 divisions. You've got more teams than MLS. You've got the same D1 status as MLS. At that point, they could be coming for MLS, right?
Yeah, but D1 status only means something because we all say it does, right? And I don't know, let's be honest. On this show, are we going to, just because USL labels something D1, are we going to talk about USL all the time? I don't know. Maybe we will, and I love USL, so I'm not opposed to that. I'm just skeptical, right? I'm skeptical that just because you call something doesn't mean that everybody else is going to believe in it and believe that it's that something, right? So I don't know. I think the relegation, the promotion side of all this, and the increased investment that's going to need to happen to make this possible, that's the wild card, right? It's the degree to which USL does those things that will force MLS to respond. But man, I don't think that just because the USL calls it a league Division 1 that MLS is quaking in their boots, right? I mean, I just don't feel that way.
But that's not what it is for me. It's that, yes, you immediately have a potential rival, even if they are very much a little brother at this point. But it's the what could happen. That is the thing that would scare me if I were an MLS owner, is that right now, they're not going to be competitive. In 10 years, they're probably not going to be a challenger either. But I think MLS has its franchises that it has with a built-in fan base. I do think some of those supporters start supporting local teams, maybe. I think they'll still keep a lot of the eyeballs they have. But there aren't that many eyeballs when it comes to watching domestic soccer in the United States. And I don't think they can afford to start losing any of those eyeballs, and I think they will. Because I think of me as a Richmond Kickers supporter, I know the Kickers are never going to be in Major League Soccer, so I love the Richmond Kickers. I care about DC United. Am I going to care about DC United as much when there's a possibility that my team could go up and go up again, and who knows what's going to happen? And I think that happens in a lot of smaller markets, in a lot of cities where maybe people haven't felt as enfranchised by the team that they support or by the team that's in their kind of geographic area. I think as soon as MLS starts to lose market share, and I think there's a chance that does happen relatively soon. Now that market share might be 1%, but I think that is a threat that they have not had to deal with and has never existed previously and now could. I think that is a thing that is worth considering, is just how many people will care much more about their local team or starting a local team or supporting local soccer because there is an idea we could go up. You never know what could happen. And I think that level of interest can't really be overlooked.
Yeah, don't underestimate the value of what could be rather than what is. I mean, we already see that in MLS, right? What did Charlotte pay for their expansion spot? Like $350 or something. San Diego.
Yeah.
We've hit, what have we hit? 500? Have we? Did I imagine that?
San Diego.
Yeah, they're not. Those owners are not paying those amounts because of what they're worth now. They're paying those amounts because of what they could be worth in the future.
Think of all the eggs you could get for that $500 million right now.
Yeah, whole few
well,
30. Yeah.
From what I hear, not that many. But the same principle applies to USL. That's how they can attract investment. Joe, can I just bring us back to something that you said? I don't know whether I heard this correctly, so I don't know whether I agree or disagree. You said something about the stories will be there, but the product needs to match for this. Was that correct?
I think so. I think the stories matter, but if the product is not super great from atmosphere to on-field play, it's not going to have as big of an impact.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, maybe I agree with that. What I would point to is Wrexham, right? Where, and I actually don't, this might sound stupid. I don't know if this happens without Welcome to Wrexham, and people keep mentioning Ted Lasso as well as something that has exposed American audiences, a mainstream American audience, to the magic of promotion and relegation. The product with Wrexham, I mean, they're getting up in League One now and might even be in the Championship next season, so they're reaching the tipping point where their team is actually becoming quite good. But for a long time, they were rubbish. Like, the product was rubbish. They were playing in non-league football, and yet still they were able to capture that audience. So if USL are clever about this, I think the story is actually the most important thing. That is the way that they package that is the thing that will actually draw, at least in the initial period, that is the thing that will draw fans into this league with pro-rel.
Totally agree. Like, American soccer needs more stories. Like that's why MLS went out and did Onside, and I don't think that's probably going to have the impact that they wanted it to. But the USL wants more stories because stories is ultimately how you get people in the door. I guess I'm not totally sure what to make of the Wrexham example because it's a perfect one to make that point, Graham. But does that have are people going to continue to tune in to watch Wrexham games? Maybe I'm not probably the target audience for that.
I mean, they did, right? Like,
right,
I didn't imagine that. They had some big audiences on ESPN.
But then it's the fact that they're spending real money to go up the pyramid and to improve the quality of the product that maybe gets more of those people to stick around. So I think I mostly agree with you, and we probably mostly agree with each other on this. I think you have to tell stories and you have to spend more money, right? I don't think you have to spend crazy, insane amounts of money all the way across the board, because the stories can do a lot of the heavy lifting. But I do think you have to improve. Like, if the USL starts this today, there are a lot of USL teams that just don't play really good soccer, and the quality of the on-field product is not very good, and the atmosphere is just not very good. Like, those things have to improve along with the stories. And I think we probably all would end up in that same boat, whatever reward percentage you assign to each one of those traits. To go back to the MLS conversation very quickly, two quick things. Number one, I do think MLS will be watching what happens here with USL. I just don't think that they're quaking in their boots necessarily right now. Maybe they will be at some point down the line. I think if they're feeling a quake coming on, maybe they buy USL. This is super speculative, by the way. But MLS has the kind of ultimate trump card in that they have so much more financial might to shape the men's domestic professional game in the United States in a way that the USL does not have. So that's one thing, is ultimately they kind of have that trump card in their back pocket, that if they decide, hey, this is getting to be a problem, let's have that. And I think I wouldn't say that's off the table, probably. The other thing is, in the more immediate term, I think there's going to be a really interesting maybe expansion race in all of this. We've talked about how the USL needs to add more teams. MLS hasn't closed the door on expansion, and when you can get $500 million, $600 million for a team, I can see why you wouldn't. The USL needs D1 locations. They already have some. MLS has also flirted with some of the markets that would make a lot of sense for USL D1, like Phoenix, Detroit, Las Vegas. I could see MLS making a move in the shorter term for those markets, though I think that's probably more a continuation of things they've already been thinking than something that's going to be dramatically spurred on by this kind of announcement.
Yeah, there we go. All right, one final question for this discussion, a very healthy discussion it's been indeed. Is there a scenario, let's say in the next decade, where USL gets bigger than MLS?
In what sense? Teams or interest, in, like, just in general terms?
Well, it's going to have more teams, right? So in terms of, does it become a bigger deal in US soccer than MLS? I won't limit it to a decade's time. Is there a point where this works as an idea, where people buy into it, where people understand that this is what soccer should be in the US, and that Major League Soccer becomes Skype and Zoom comes along? Is that what happens here? We all thought Skype had it, and then Zoom came along. Right?
We all did think Skype had it, didn't we?
Right?
We used to record on Skype back in the day. First of all,
we did.
And now they're gone, Taylor. Now they're gone.
Yeah.
So, could that happen here?
Well, hopefully USL doesn't need a pandemic for that to happen.
You never know.
But Graham, what do you think?
yeah, go ahead.
10
Yeah,
years. No, not in 10 years. I think MLS has such a huge advantage. I mean, we were just talking about how owners are paying $500 million for expansion spots in MLS. And not only is USL nowhere near that level, but that $500 million then gives those teams runway, right? Where maybe they don't need to be immediately successful, but 5 to 10 years down the line, you maybe get the benefit of that sort of investment. So you kind of worded your question there, Ryan, of is it bigger than MLS? But then the second part was like, does this work? I think there's absolutely a scenario where this works for USL, whereas it is much more of a threat to MLS, where there's much more interest and you have growing leagues and growing teams and growing attendances and everything. I actually think that's likely from off the back of this announcement. But do I think that it'll be bigger than MLS in general terms within 10 years? No, I don't.
Yeah, I think Graham is correct, because I think there is a scenario in which USL gets every single thing right, and they've got a really competitive and fun top flight and a strong second division and a somewhat less strong third division, and everything's great. I think an equally likely scenario is the quality isn't that great, there isn't as much money behind it, and at least for the first 5 to 10 years, it is sort of, we have pro-rel, other leagues don't. We are trying to kind of stabilize and figure out how to make everything work and how to get stronger teams. And I think it takes a long time to get that quality where they would probably want it to be. However, I think there's a good chance it starts to hurt MLS in 10 years if things go even moderately well for USL, just because, like, if you are a potential owner looking at MLS, in the past, there isn't really another game in town. So it's worth that expenditure. It's a closed system, it's a cartel. You can go in there with your money and you know where you're going to be. Now, if you look over at USL and USL Premier League or whatever it's going to be, like if you spend a significantly smaller amount of money, starting off even in the third division, and work your way up really quickly, is that alluring? Does that appeal to an owner who might otherwise pay that franchise fee? I do wonder how much of just little things it erodes in Major League Soccer or forces change from in Major League Soccer. And so in that way, I don't think it surpasses it, but I think it can start to cause problems for MLS sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think I agree with Taylor. Just maybe I'd flip the sooner rather than later to later rather than sooner. I think this is going to take a long time to get off the ground in the first place. And even then, would it shock me if the first year there's promotion and relegation in the USL and it's very exciting, I'm stoked about it, we're stoked about it, and it's one team moving up and down? That wouldn't shock me at all. I think this is going to take a long time to get these things into place, and I think it's going to take even longer for it to have, like, for it to be proven, right? I sort of am picturing, and this isn't any information or whatever that I've heard, I'm just picturing MLS sort of sitting back and watching this happen, right? If this turns into a viable business model that helps the USL really progress, MLS is going to take note of that. And I could see them potentially making a play for USL, or I could see them trying to do something similar way down the line. But it's going to take a long time before this happens, first of all, before this concept exists in the United Soccer League. And then it's going to take longer to have enough data to know what the impact actually has been.
Joe, we talk a lot, though, about, like, what do you do once Messi is done? Like, you've signed the biggest player in world soccer, the greatest player of all time, many, myself included, would say, and yet there's a feeling that they haven't capitalized upon it. I don't know if there's anything bigger they can do. Like, change the schedule, that's cool, but if USL is doing the same thing, I don't know if it has the impact it might have had a couple years ago. And I just think there's not a ton MLS can do to really eclipse USL if and when they start, like, launching pro-rel and have that in existence. You can keep signing names, but at a certain point you're just signing names. Unless you really do massively loosen up the purse strings and allow there to be competitive imbalance, that's the only thing I could see them really doing, short of, and here's my other question, like, who are the three biggest, most successful clubs in the USL Championship, Joe?
Louisville City is the first one. The Charleston Battery at the moment have been excellent, and Phoenix Rising is probably the one that would come to mind as well.
Okay, and so if you're USL and you are sort of hanging a good chunk of your hopes on those three being part of your Premier Division, if MLS came in and was like, hey, you know what, guys? You can be in Major League Soccer for, a $25 million expansion fee. Do they take that? I feel like they might take that. And then suddenly does MLS cut the legs out from USL? I don't think that's a thing that MLS would want to do because it immediately devalues their product. But it would be interesting if MLS did decide to just start throwing wrenches at the USL and seeing what they can make not happen.
Well, and that's kind of what I was getting at earlier with, I could see MLS expanding into a couple of these markets that USL very much has earmarked for their Division I league. I think there'd be riots if they did it for $25 million across the ownership boardroom. But point taken on that, Taylor. I disagree with what you're saying about MLS not having other levers to pull. Getting big names matters a ton, right? Like that matters a ton. And MLS has been spending more and more and more. It just happens subtly to the point where maybe people haven't noticed it. And maybe that's part of the problem, right? Because that is still the perception, even if it's not necessarily the reality in a lot of cases. They're spending transfer fees that are USL Championship expansion fees, right? I think that maybe puts some of this into context. I just think that MLS can continue to spend if it wants to. And that's the big question. We don't know. It doesn't seem like they really, really, really want to go for it and make a play for being a top league in the world. But if MLS can figure out a way to tell better stories, and if MLS can continue to spend at even increasing the rate that it's been spending at now, I just really, really have a hard time picturing USL trying to challenge MLS. And you know who else has had that similar problem is also Paul McDonough, who has said multiple times publicly, like, we're not trying to challenge MLS. The USL is a hyper-localized league, and I think will really continue to be so even after pro-rel is implemented. But maybe something happens here that helps it penetrate at the national level. Maybe pro-rel is going to have a bigger impact than I think it will. At the end of the day, I'm just stoked that this is going to be a thing, because I live in a USL market at the moment, and I love it, and I really, really hope that we get some fun stories out of this.
There we go. Top 3 teams in USL, no less, according to Joe Lowry there. There we go. The USL Pro has been discussed on The Big Thing. Let's continue this conversation on our Patreon. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. You can join our Discord. We'll have a chat with you in there. Thank you very much to everybody who joins us in there and supports us. But for now, Taylor Rockwell, thank you very much for Big Thinging.
My pleasure, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe Lowry.
Hey, thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Graham Ruthven.
Thank you, Ryan Bailey.
And thank you very much, listener, for joining us on this one. We'll be back on the feed very shortly indeed. But for now, bye!